Okay, so now that we have the squash and stretch control set up here in our model or here in our ball, we have to find a way to easily control this factor or this factor slider without opening the attribute editor. So that's where the squash and stretch controller comes in. So we need to find a way to link the squash and stretch controller to the factor attribute of the squash control. Okay, so let's try to do it. So first, here in my menu, I'm going to look for key. So please do take note that I am inside the animation menu set. So I'm going to press key, and then I'm going to look for set driven key. Then choose set. Okay, so basically here, using the set driven key, we are going to make or going to create a link between the factor attribute of the squash control to the squash and stretch controller that we have created earlier. So the set driven key has two elements. So we have here the driver, and then we have here the driven. So basically the driver is the element, or basically the curve, that will control whatever you want to move or whatever you want to control. So in this case, we want this squash and stretch controller to be the driver. So I'm going to select this curve, and I'm going to click load driver. And then as for the driven, I'm going to choose the squash handle, and then inside the attributes editor, I'm going to open the squash tab. Okay, so for this one, we have to make sure that we will only be affecting this factor attribute. So in order for us to do so, all you need to do is just press right click here in the factor, and then choose set driven key. Okay, set driven key. So as you can see here, when I choose set driven key, this factor will be automatically loaded inside the set driven key. So basically, all we need to do is just to make sure that the curve or the controller that we have set up earlier is still loaded. So let me just load it again. Load driver. Okay. So now that the squash and stretch control and the attributes or the nonlinear attributes for the squash already loaded, we need to create a link. So we want the translate y of this curve to be connected to the factor of the squash. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose translate y, and then I'm going to click factor. So by doing so, we are telling Maya to create a link between translate y and factor. So after creating a link, all you need to do is just to click key. So once you click key, it will automatically remember the position of the curve and the value of the factor. Okay. Next, since we have already created a link between the squash control and the squash deformer, let's now try to create the boundaries. So first, I'm going to select the squash and stretch control, and then I am going to move it upwards. So let's say I'm going to move it at around 0.5 value. There. So when I move this controller to 0.5 in the y-axis, I want the factor, or I want this, the deformer to move as well. So basically, I want it to stretch. So let's try a value of 0.5 as well. Okay. So again, the squash and stretch deformer, or the squash and stretch control, is set to 5 in a translate y. And as for the deformer itself, the factor is set to 0.5. So all we need to do is just to press key again. So by pressing key, it will again remember this position. So as you can see here, when I try to move this squash and stretch controller, notice that the squash deformer is moving as well. Okay, so we now have the higher boundary. Okay, next. So a while ago, we set the value of this controller to positive 0.5. This time, let's try to set the value to negative 0.5. Negative 0.5. So basically, it will move downwards. So when this controller moves downwards, we want the factor of the squash and stretch handle to move downwards as well. So let's try a value of negative 0.5 as well. Okay, so let's check the values again. For the squash and stretch control, translate y is set to negative 0.5. And then for the squash handle, the factor is set to negative 0.5 as well. So now that the positions are already correct, again, all you need to do is just to press key. Again, by doing so, this setup will now remember the position of the factor and the squash and stretch control. So let's try to test it out. So when I move this controller upwards, we are going to generate a stretch. And when I move this controller downwards, it's going to generate a squash. And also, when I set, or when I go back to 0, it will go back to its original position. So that's how we use the set-driven key to create a connection between the squash handle with the controller that we have created earlier.